Greetings, RAISE community. Brent coming in live from Tucson, Arizona. This is the last podcast we are recording before making our way over to the San Antonio and Austin area as our family's RV road schooling remote work adventure continues. I am super excited to welcome Amy Yancey, the Vice President for Development at Boston College, to today's show.
Hi, Brent. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it is great to have Amy here. We were talking about the relatively mild winter that Boston has had. And given that she moved up to Boston a couple of years ago after spending a bunch of time further south, we're glad that she's still hanging in there. We will get to your time in Boston, but I love asking our guests about your own higher education journey. So take me way back to Amy in junior year of high school, and what you were up to at that time. And as you thought about your own college search, what led you to the University of Tennessee, and what stands out from your own higher education experience?
Thanks, Brent. Well, we won't start too far in high school. I was in high school in the 80s, and so some of that is now stricken from the record. But
I have to say, I've been very into the Cobra Kai reboot. I don't know if you've caught it yet, yes, but it is so good.
I love it.
So 80s, and so there we go.
I've been. It's a guilty pleasure of mine as well, Brent. But yeah, I changed high schools in the middle of or right before my junior year, and we moved to Germantown, Tennessee. And I had, a favorite uncle, so I thought I wanted to be an attorney like my favorite uncle. And I had grown up in Texas, and so I thought I was going to go to the University of Texas, and spent a couple of great years in Tennessee. And I really only applied to 3 schools. Things were very different there. There was, then there was no Common Core. You had to do really paper applications, and I applied to Rhodes, which was right there in Memphis, and Millsap. So a couple of very different schools from the University of Tennessee, but I guess the orange attracted me, and the large football program. And I never looked back. I was thrilled to have the experience that I did, and it was transformative for me. I didn't have a traditional educational experience. I ended up needing to put myself through school for part of the time. I worked a lot. I took time off. It took me a while to find my calling, but I really credit my experiences in college with helping me have the focus that I have today, and the experiences and the passion for doing the work that we do.
And like everyone from the University of Tennessee, you immediately decided to move to LA and get into the video game business.
That is, that's correct. I mean, it was the obvious choice. I majored in philosophy.
Tell me a little bit more about when that first even got on your radar at all, and just what that experience was like. Not typical for the most advancement pros.
Sure. So there had actually been a group of us in school that had plans to be out in LA. By that point, I no longer thought I wanted to be in law school, but I had a good friend who moved to LA and was going to go to law school there. I thought I'd kind of take a year off and figure out what I wanted to do. In the course of doing that, I met a person who was starting up a book publishing company that served the computer game industry. Computer games at the time were really geared towards, I'd say, upper middle class professional men, right? Because they had computers in their homes that were powerful enough to run these big games. So we were working on games like The Art of War, Jane's Strategy. We did the book for the first Microsoft flight simulation, Fly. But it was really kind of a work for hire. We kind of created the content, and then we took it all the way through print production and sent the books to the fulfillment shops to be packaged with the boxes. And this is so long ago, Brent, that you didn't get your manual on the software, or you didn't download it and stream. It was actually a physical book. So it was really great, and I learned a lot. But But when my husband and I realized we were expecting our daughter, we realized we didn't want to be on the other side of the country from our families who were still in Tennessee. His family was in Knoxville. I loved my time there. It was an easy choice to go back to Knoxville. But as you alluded to, in Knoxville, Tennessee, there's not a lot of computer game work happening. There was not a lot of publishing. The largest employer was my alma mater. So like many people who've been in this business for 20 years or longer, I didn't really know what advancement was, but I had these customer service skills and I'd worked with international clients and I had technology skills and I could do communications work and I was a pretty solid writer and editor. And so I got a job as a communications person in an advancement office at the Institute of Agriculture and spent my first 7 years there. I knew very quickly that I wanted to raise money. I just thought it was amazing to hear philanthropists talk about how grateful they were for the opportunity to give their money to something that was meaningful and powerful to them. The first time I interviewed a donor who was thanking me for the gift they had given to the University of Tennessee, I was hooked. I just wanted to work with people like that all the time.
I love that you shared that. And we had another guest who just shared something similar. Is there a greater disconnect between this perception that, well, I don't want to ask someone for money, or it's all about asking for money, and then the actual reality of so many people who get inspired, as you did early in your career, is they're thanking me for helping me make a gift, make an impact, achieve my goals. And I like, why is there such a disconnect between I don't want to ask somebody for money to what it's actually like having those donor interactions?
Sure, and I think we're really conditioned at an early age and societally to not talk about money and to not talk about wealth and to not ask people about their wealth, and I think that conditioning takes a lot to overcome. What I will often tell kind of emerging career fundraisers who are struggling with knowing when to get to the ask, particularly if they're working with people who we know are philanthropic in other ways, is that, people work with wealth advisors all the time, right? And they are used to talking about their money with people who are, professionally geared towards helping them make decisions. And so this is another kind of wealth decision that people are fortunate enough and that we're fortunate enough that they are able to make. And we're there to advise them, and we're there to advise them in specific ways that they can do that work meaningful at the institutions that we work for. And then the other thing that I think about is getting caught up on the money, right? I believe in the mission of what we do here at Boston College. As I said earlier, my educational experience transformed my life, and my life would not have turned out the same way had I not had that opportunity. And I believe deeply in that. So I'm really asking people to help me do that. And the money is a tool to get us there.
It's such a great way to reframe it and to just be able to confidently challenge people, ask people. It doesn't mean that you don't hear no sometimes, or that sometimes it really is, I've got to ask somebody for money, but hopefully it's really asking people more about what kind of impact they want to have and how you might be a conduit to make it happen.
Yeah, and I'm really pragmatic too. And we know that people, when they are asked why they gave, they say, because somebody asked me. And we know that the thing that correlates to being able to execute on that mission most directly is the number of asks that you make. So respectfully, you never want it to be transactional, or you don't want the transaction to supersede the lifelong relationship that your alumni or your families or other philanthropists have with your institution. But it's okay to ask, and we should be respectful of their time too. If they've taken the meeting, they want to know why we're there. And at the point at which we need to ask, we need to go ahead and be respectful of that and honor their time and their intention.
Well, you don't work in the sector for as long as you have, having made as many asks directly or that you've been a part of. So I have to ask, do you have any stories you can share of asks that have gone really well, or asks that have gone completely off the rails, which are usually the most fun stories? Just curious on either side, if anything strikes you as being really good or really challenging.
Oh, that's such That's such a great question. And my favorite gift kind of relates to one of the other things that I tell people, which is we do a lot of research and we think we know a lot of things, but we shouldn't be assumptive about what we know. We really need to do the good foundational work to know and understand where donors are coming from and what motivates them. And I say, you should treat everybody that you're interacting with, it's just good customer service background that I come from, right? As if they were going to be a really high-end donor. And I won't say what institution, but one of the institutions that I worked for, one of the administrative assistants, her partner was doing research in the institution's library. She worked for one of the administrators, and we had, kind of a casual hallway relationship. And she said that they wanted to do something for the university because they'd had such a good experience. And we went and visited them, and it was a large 6-figure gift, from somebody who was in an administrative role. It was an estate gift. So because they had been treated well and they had a meaningful experience with the institution. And certainly the person who was in that chief position, you hope that nobody would not want to go make that visit, but it paid off to do it. And it was just a wonderful affirmation that it's important for us to represent our institutions with everyone that we work with, including our own internal audiences.
Well, it links very well to a comment that you made when we were doing our pre-work around this idea that if you could sort of wave a magic wand and change one thing about the advancement sector, what would it be? And you said humility. And I think that's reflected in the story you just shared, which is you said we don't know as much as we think we do. How do we sort of stay humble? And so I just like to kind of unpack that a little bit, because there's a balance between, being confident, assertive, aggressive, but also staying humble.
Yeah. I really, truly mean that. I think that we do need to do our fundamentals. We have gotten very good in this profession in doing our work in systematic ways. We're at different places in different institutions, but our really mature fundraising institutions can almost be like an engine, and we can really pass over opportunity, and we can pass over people, and they can kind of get left behind. I think one of the most important lessons for me is that I've never gone on a joint visit with another fundraiser at any level of the organization or any other faculty member or university leader where I didn't learn something from that individual, right? And so that, that can be surprising that, if we were traveling, I would be trying to make room for some visits that might be more kind of early discovery qualification. And because it's always interesting to see how people approach their work, and you hope that they can learn from you. But as leaders, we also need to remember that that there's a lot of talent on our teams, and that our alumni and donors are so very smart too, right? And they have a lot to offer, and we need to take the time to listen.
I'm curious how that influences the language or the words that we use to describe donors or prospects. And I don't want to be presumptuous. I don't know about, the inner workings of how you all are operating today, but I do think, and we're probably guilty of this as a vendor partner as well, is we're so focused on trying to bring more science, right? Bring more analytics, try to bring as much automation as possible, because we only have so much time in the day. And we know that there are more, I'm going to say it, more good prospects out there than we can get to.
Yeah.
But that also might mean that we run an algorithm, spit out a score, and then we decide that these are bad prospects. And I just wonder, even the language of good prospect, bad prospect, is that a problem for the sector? Because it's really possible that the gift you referenced earlier, somebody would have done research and said that's a bad prospect, or maybe they would have said that's not a good prospect, and we're wrong. And there are enough anecdotes that surface where we just cannot be, no matter how much data we have at our disposal, we're never going to be as good as maybe we think we are. And I'm just curious how you think about that sort of language.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's, I catch myself doing it. It's something that I have that I've coached others on, that we need to be really careful internally and externally about using that word like prospect manager, right? It is shorthand for the work that we do, but most of our quote unquote prospects wouldn't want to think that they were managed. And so it's really important that, and I almost always try to say prospective donor, even in shorthand, rather than just kind of shorting it to prospects, so that it's clear that what we're talking about is somebody who might engage philanthropically with us. So I think there's the one piece of it where yes, the language helps bias this. And I am a huge proponent of data-driven decisions as an organization. I think we're going to, emerge, whatever emerging from the pandemic looks like, most likely K-shaped, and we're going to continue to have to make really strong, give really strong rationales behind making investments, like we did after 2008 and 2009 in our business. And so we're going to have to be smart. We're going to have a really high return on the investment. At the same time, you can't replace the human piece of what we do. And it's important that we don't. And it speaks a little bit to what I was talking about earlier about not taking any single transaction, any single data point, and not really applying a thoughtful lens to that, to the extent that you have the bandwidth to do that. And so I always like to say, no never means no, right? It means not right now. And when we think about, or if we kind of surface disqualify people from a call, that's not right this minute, because there are people maybe that it's more pressing for us to talk to. And if somebody ever tells me no, I don't think that means, unless they said, I don't want to, I never want to give a gift to your institution. They don't. They mean, this isn't the right gift. This isn't the right time. This isn't the right amount. And you need to make sure you're asking those follow-up questions so that you know how to get it better the next time.
Do you have any examples? Don't mean to put you on the spot too much, but do you have any examples where the initial reaction was no, or not right now, or this isn't the right fit, but that with, ongoing conversations, repackaging, repositioning, somebody did come back around and was in a position to step up and make a meaningful contribution?
I had a great example of that, at a former institution. Came on board and, ended up overseeing somebody who had been there. She'd probably been there about a decade, but she was towards, she was getting close to, she spent her last 20 years in advancement, and she was getting, she'd been there about 8 years. And so about the end of my time, she was about ready to retire. And right before she retired, one of her first visits came through with a big estate gift, a 7-figure estate gift. And it was one of those where when she was on the West Coast, she would call on him, and he was always friendly, and he engaged as a volunteer. And he said, at some point, you're going to be in my estate plans. And she could never get him to commit. But she stuck with him. She wasn't the only one. I called on him a time or two. Several people met him at various events. So he was pretty well connected to various advancement professionals on the team there. But she called me and she said, "You are not going to believe who documented their estate gift," because it had been like 7 years or something. And
do you think part of this concern was part of this concern? If I say yes, if I document it, then I'm not going to have people visiting me. Was there like an element of wanting kind of that relationship management to persist?
I am not going to lie, Brent. There are people like that in the world. We know the people who love to have lunch, love to check in, love having somebody on kind of speed dial when they want to check in on something that they read. But I really don't think that was it. I really think, he was in a more speculative business, and he wanted to wait till he was closer to retirement to kind of maximize what he thought he was going to be able to do. And he was also just really busy, right? And so he just never really had time to sit down and be thoughtful about it. And they weren't just excuses. And my good friend and colleague, didn't take them as excuses, but I think she thought she was going to retire without seeing that gift come in. And so, that's just a classic example. And he was not an annual donor, and he was not a major donor. I mean, he had said it would be a sizable estate gift when he was ready to do it. And so there was not a lot to kind of keep us on the line, so to speak, but it paid off because of the relationship.
It's a great story. And I'm curious, as you transitioned from the University of Tennessee, you spent some time at Penn State, you spent almost over 7 years at University of Virginia. There are a lot of folks who tend to get started in the advancement space at their alma mater, and that was your situation. What is it like going from selling a mission that you benefited from, that you felt was transformative in your life, where you could speak about every building and the key programs and the mission and the impact so authentically because you lived it, and then made the move both to Penn State or UVA and had to sell somebody else's mission? And I know that access to higher education drives you, and that drives a lot of our guests. And so maybe it was just getting excited about access to higher education, whether it's Penn State, UVA, Boston College, or your alma mater at the University of Tennessee. Was that a challenging transition?
So, it was, and I had a wonderful experience at Penn State. And if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't get to be there longer. But at the time, single mom, I was just too far away from family who was still down and in Tennessee and even further away. And but it wasn't, because I spent those first 7 years of the maybe almost 10 that I was at the University of Tennessee in ag, I was really connected to the land grant mission. But I kind of left being in that applied science world and land grant mission to go work at the University of Tennessee libraries for a phenomenal dean. And there was a service and access component to the work that librarians do it's hard not to beam over, right? And so I followed a dean to Penn State initially. And so I was working with the same dean. Librarians are the experts that the experts go to when they're stumped and they need to find information. So I just worked with a wonderful group of people there, and that was really, really easy. And it was tough to leave Penn State, but likewise, when I realized it wasn't going to work out kind of geographically, it was, Penn State College is not the easiest place to get in and out of when you're traveling, and some things like that were just logistically challenging. And I had the opportunity to talk to the University of Virginia. It was for a cause base. I've always been driven by mission, and there was some real overlap in the kinds of challenges that you have to overcome to fundraise for a library when it's not a school and an academic fundraising environment that were similar to the opportunity at Virginia.
And the common challenge that we hear, having worked with a variety of different university libraries and also broader, units around campus, is there's no natural constituency. On one hand, everybody's a prospective donor, and on the other hand, nobody's a prospective donor, or maybe has that sense of, I don't know, obligation, or just by default, of course, I'm going to support my alma mater is one thing. I'm going to support the library is something very different. So what was it like navigating that? And certainly it sounds like you did so very successfully at UVA.
Yeah. So navigating that is, it is really challenging, and all or none, or neither one of those are tenable situations. So, you have to have a really good marketing stance, right? Because you can't just stay within your own donor pool. You need to do some word of mouth work. You also know that you've got materials that are supporting every possible discipline under the sun. Somebody who is passionate about cooking might be really excited to hear that you have a really remarkable vintage cookbook collection, and you'd be surprised at how many people really get close to that. At Virginia, the challenge was the same, but the cause was a little bit different. They wanted to renovate the rotunda. They wanted to emphasize fundraising for the Jeffersonian grounds. And there was a really, particular challenge with that piece, because UVA was so decentralized, they're not as much now. There's a lot more hybrid and cooperative fundraising now, but at the time they were very much foundation driven. They hadn't really focused heavily on central priorities. And then on top of that, there was some real cultural tension between kind of the glorified story of the historic grounds and Jefferson's role in finding the university and this beautiful UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the fact that it was built by enslaved laborers. And so it was exciting to be able to go and restore a beautiful place, to think about the real history of a place like the university, but to also know that we needed to work together as a community to kind of grapple with a history and a legacy that didn't tell everyone's story. And I'm really proud of the work that I did there. And a lot of that work got carried through by successors, and the memorial to enslaved laborers was a fundraising effort started by one of my team members, and it's a beautiful and powerful place. And I know that Virginia is really committed to continuing to grapple with their legacy.
Yeah, it had to be a fascinating kind of background to have, and additional context and perspective in light of so many of the challenges around social justice that we've experienced this year. You had to feel like you were, I don't know, just extra, connected to some of the, some of the opportunities and challenges associated with all of that.
Well, certainly, I remember Rodney King, and having grown up in the South, for people who are not yet at a place where they can kind of see systemic racism at work in our society. They may not have had the experiences that I had in the South, where there's just a distinct way of excluding people, particularly Black people, from certain parts of society and opportunity. And I think that the South has come a long way, but there are still many trouble spots. They're certainly not the only place that they're troublesome. But I remember real estate agents, using "this is a good school district" as kind of code for "this is a mostly white school." And it was very upsetting to me and to my family. And I still have a lot of work to do in that space as well. But being in Charlottesville when the Unite the Right rally happened was a true preview to some of what we saw on January 6th. And I think a real wake-up call that we cannot ignore the fact that we have these really systemic barriers to access. As you said earlier, that's part of what drives us. The public mission is part of access. Virginia and Boston College both are committed to meeting 100% of demonstrated need, but we have to do more than that, right? And we have a real opportunity, I think, to do that. But I also want to be clear that in advancement, we've been talking about this almost since I've been in higher education advancement, and we have moved the needle in very small ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good segue to one of the areas that you spoke to in your pre-podcast questionnaire, which was, where is the advancement sector underinvesting? And you said we're clearly underinvested in talent management and DEI and J accountability. And could you just tell me a little bit more about your perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty good at getting what we measure and what we track and what we commit to doing as goal-driven institutions, and we just have not made progress to diversify our teams. We know that when we survey our teams, and I know this from a consortium of colleagues that I've worked with, that I went through leadership training with, that we hear the same things when we survey our team members and we give them the opportunity to respond anonymously to what their experience is like, that they don't always feel welcome. We can still be really cliquey. We are still really dependent upon our existing networks for hiring, in the same way that we're really dependent on existing networks for recruiting new volunteers and alumni to boards and things like that. And so if we're going to kind of, in a deliberate and intentional way, kind of fight what is like an echo box, right, of talent recruitment, whether that's for volunteers or for donors or for speakers, or for people that we're going to hire. We just have to expand our network, and we have to disavow ourselves of the notion that somebody who's coming to us from a similar institution is best prepared to help us lead our institution into the new challenges that we are going to face. And if we don't, we're going to leave an entire generation of alumni behind. We are already feeding the funnel of the disproportion of the, where the gifts come in, right? Fewer and fewer gifts, larger from fewer and fewer donors. And we really have to do something. My colleague Cindy Frederick on one of your podcasts said philanthropy is about more than dollars, and it is. It's about love for humanity. And one of the ways that a university degree is valuable is through the ways that you get to connect with your alma mater and connect with your former classmates, and shape that institution because you're involved. And so we have to widen the net, and we have to do it now.
Well said. And I think, I'm optimistic that the way that work is changing as a result of the pandemic could really support those objectives. And, even in our own experience in building Evertrue, we're thinking about the same issues as every leader is right now. And, one of the opportunities that I'm excited about is just the way that remote work and additional flexibility in where people work and how they work might allow us to change our networks, as you were saying, and to access different talent pools who in the past we simply might not have even attempted to attract because it was relying on somebody coming to 330 Congress Street in the Seaport in order to have the job. And so, we've even the way we're thinking about broadening our recruiting efforts to be able to target HBCUs, for example, that in the past just geographically weren't well connected to New England, would have been more challenging. And so I'm curious from where you sit, I think already, the tech sector, there was an amazing blog post that one of the leading investors in the software space put out recently, which is, it was basically enterprise sales is never going back to the way it was. We're never going back to a bunch of sales reps sitting on a floor, hammering out phone calls, elbow to elbow from 9 to 5 every day, which isn't necessarily the way advancement shops operate. But the same comment was, we're not going back to people getting on the plane to go do the demo all the time. And so I do think that there's this tension and opportunity of, well, when do things get back to normal? We talk to fundraisers all the time who are like, I can't wait to get back out there and meet people. On the other hand, we're seeing in the tech sector, people saying that's never going to happen again. And as a result, we can hire people of more diverse backgrounds wherever they are. We can engage prospects and customers wherever they are. And what might that mean for both talent recruitment for a place like Boston College, but also how you can engage maybe underrepresented groups that aren't as, let's say, densely concentrated in the Northeast. And so that is one of the areas that I think higher education is going to struggle with, because we are so focused on the campus, the grounds, the physical, beautiful spaces are a lot different than the office park that tech company isn't going to renew their lease at. But how do you think about what that means for the future of a development team? I mean, will we have a world where someday half of BC's frontline fundraisers might not have a desk, in Chestnut Hill?
All of the best, I think all of the best fundraising institutions in the country right now are grappling with this question and starting to set up working groups and talking to their campus planners about how you plan for kind of a work environment and what is the infrastructure for that work environment that we need to do well. Because I don't think that this is not just about whether or not we get on planes and fly out to the West Coast and need to build trip density to make it worthwhile. It's about the fact that we've seen better turnout for some types of events virtually, right? Because more than just people in Boston can, or people even right here in Boston, but don't want to deal with the Boston commute to make it over to Chestnut Hill, or the weather. right, are saying, well, I can tune in. And so we're going to have to figure out how to do hybrid offerings that still allow you to connect with the wonderful physical space. I think our physical spaces are always going to be important to us.
Yeah.
I think the nostalgia will always be important to us, but this is another way that I think we're losing some of our young alumni because they are nostalgic. They did love their experience, but that doesn't motivate them to give in the same ways that it did previous generations. Maybe it will once they're at a certain age, but we need them on board with us now. And so we need to be thinking about impact-driven philanthropy, and that's a lot less just about the college experience and the warm feeling that you get when you step on campus. I do think that there are some differences, right? We are asking people to do things with their disposable income and their disposable time, which is often, much more precious to them. And that sometimes means that you need to be sitting face to face in a room with someone. Oftentimes people are doing things to honor family members that they've lost. They're working through emotional decisions through their philanthropy because they're addressing issues that affected them or affected family members. And that sometimes takes something that we can't replace with technology. I do think our discovery work is going to change. I also think our prospect work is going to change. Organizing regionally, organizing around trips. We should be getting to those people who are most ready to have those conversations sooner, regardless of where they are. And if it's a fruitful conversation, then sure, we can jump on the plane or we can take the president. We can also get our president, our provosts, our chancellors, our faculty in the room a lot faster, right?
Oh, that's got to be such a difference versus like the logistics of figuring out when the president's going to go to the West Coast versus here's a Zoom link. I mean, what's that feel like in your role? That's got to be huge.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal, and we're really lucky that our president, Father Leahy, he's phenomenal in this format. He's very comfortable. He's warm, and he's totally comfortable in it, and that has just been a huge boon because people have a lot more access to him, and he's willing to take unscripted questions as they come, and that's just a really powerful tool. We can give you an experience that you probably couldn't have gotten if you had attended in person, because a lot of people would be waiting in line to kind of shake hands.
Right. Hello. Right. No, I think, we're getting a lot of questions. I just had a conversation with Matthew Lambert at William and Mary yesterday about kind of the future of travel and the future of events. And I think that there's going to be just a different framework to evaluate. I think low ROI travel is gone. I really do. I don't think we're going to be able to justify low ROI, totally discovery, hoping that something pops on the West Coast. I think we can, if we can't have a quality qualification conversation over Zoom, if somebody won't even have the discussion, highly unlikely that it really is going to be that different if we show up and take them out to coffee in person. For the emotional, the gift planning, the estate, the transformational, that's high ROI travel. That needs to come back. It will come back. And maybe there will be hybrid approaches, which is you go physically and Father Leahy comes in via Zoom digitally there. And so that you can create still that personal connection with far less cost and logistical challenge. And I think the same thing around events. There are certain types of events, reunions, football tailgates, things that you cannot scale virtually with the same experience that need to come back, that are truly unique and take advantage of the physical space. And there's probably a lot of low ROI physical events that maybe can be done even better virtually because you can reach more people. It's less, costly, certainly less time intensive. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how it all sort of shakes out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, California, particularly LA, was always a problem for us, right? I haven't not a single institution that I've kind of worked closely with or worked for didn't struggle to be able to keep those meetings just because of the the logistical challenges of getting around in Los Angeles. And so this kind of takes that off the table.
Yeah.
I think it'll accelerate some of our conversations in really powerful ways too, right? Because we don't need to say, okay, I'm going to be back in Los Angeles in 3 months. Can I see you again then? And then that's dependent on something not coming up that interferes with that timeline. You can say, this is great. I think I can pull this together for you in the next week to 10 days. Do you want to go ahead and get something on your calendar? You know, we've all got our phone right here. So we don't even have to kind of scroll behind the Zoom screen. So I do think our work is going to be transformed. I think we're going to have to be really nimble. We just had a leadership retreat, Brent, where we talked about this. We have to solve for the short term, and the short term is still uncertain in some really important ways as it relates to events and how we get to the end of the year and how the vaccine rolls out. But we can't stop strategic planning. Right. Because it's just going to be critical that we put our priority on those things that are most impactful in our organizations, and that we prepare our staff for the fact that they're not coming back to a work environment that was exactly how they left it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, taking maybe the most extreme example or one of the most extreme opportunities is think about international fundraising and what the potential could be, right? When it used to be, we go to London once a year or every 3 years or whatever it may be, when we're a Zoom link away from every key prospect in London, and Father Leahy's a Zoom link away, and every, you know, the chancellor and the provost and you name it. I don't think anybody has had time to really even take a deep breath and think about what is the future of international discovery. But that's one of the areas that I'm really excited about, because the world has gotten even flatter, and we're instantly right there with anybody, and you know, who's not coming back, and we're not going to see them, and we never really were. So, you know, that to me seems like an area where it's almost pure upside, unlike what do we do in our local market in Boston, where we've kind of always done it this one way with the events, and how does that all change? That's a hard kind of balance to strike. But I'm curious about your take, not just on kind of hard to reach physical destinations in the United States, but globally. Have you given that any thought, or have you had any experiences yet?
Yeah, we absolutely. That's one of the places that we have actually gone ahead and made some important kind of organizational changes to accommodate for. It hasn't been enough time to bear out, but just through no deliberate decisions, we had the two people who were in those international roles for us, move into different positions. And it gave us a chance to rethink that. We still felt like we needed someone who was a sophisticated fundraiser that would carry an international portfolio and do some of that work. But then we also realized we could distribute those portfolios among our more senior fundraising team who, would normally be organized geographically. Yeah. And so we've got a real opportunity to say, again, who are the people that we always wish we had more time with, but we just can't get there enough. Yeah. And can we get them with somebody who knows how to navigate our senior leadership, on our side, and is a really thoughtful fundraiser and can navigate kind of the cultural differences depending on where in the world we're working. And so we've started to make those moves. So we had the two positions. We're replacing it more with like a senior philanthropic advisor. And then we'll distribute more of that portfolio across the university. And yeah, if there's going to be a high ROI trip that needs to happen, then yep. we'll do that after we've kind of gathered that intelligence.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when you think about the lower ROI trips, even internationally, that might have happened in the past, if we now can distribute those prospective donors to the rest of the maybe more senior fundraising team, we can engage them remotely, and we don't have to spend $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 to get overseas and hotels and planes and see them physically. How can we take that $3,000, $5,000 or $10,000 and reinvest it into an amazing donor experience? Would they rather have you spend $5,000 to go see them and have lunch, or would they rather have a 30-minute Zoom call with Father Leahy or somebody else that would be high impacted? Like, that's, I think, part of the trade-off where we've got an opportunity to not only reduce some of that budget or spend, but then reinvest it in things that maybe are higher impact to the donor anyway, and certainly are able to free up a lot more time than it would take to go do those trips. So it's exciting to see where that could all shake out.
It is, and we're grappling with the different ways that we might go about doing that, and then kind of building the habits for our fundraising team to immediately think, if I'm stuck, who can I talk to about who might be the right person to pull into this meeting? Because that's true of our colleagues right here in advancement as well, right? It means that Jim Husson and I are much more accessible than we would be under normal circumstances. It means that if we have a centralized team, but if you need your liaison from the school in the room with you because somebody's really interested in something and you're a broad generalist, it's like let me see if I can get Maria right here on the Zoom with us, or if she'd be willing to schedule some time. So I think there's a lot
memorable. I think that's
another
great advantage is, instead of it being the one-to-one relationship building, it's more now as a development professional or the prospect manager, if you will, how can I be more of an orchestrator, right? How can I bring in the other key people around campus that collectively can really inspire a given donor to do the what's possible? And I feel like that's really going to be part of the changing role. Is it's not just me sitting across one-on-one and wowing you. And obviously there was always some collaborative aspects of fundraising, but that idea that you can now just add a couple more people to the Zoom invite as long as schedules are free can really change the donor experience, right? I mean, do you have any collaborative Zoom, success stories that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an upcoming meeting this week with a small advisory, kind of council of one of our boards. And, normally for something that small, it's 7 people and me and Jim, we wouldn't be able to get, the provost and the president and, and our EVP in the room, but we're going to be able to do that. And that's going to be really highly consequential. They're probably going to, invest 30 minutes of their time total to be there, but it's going to feel like you're in the room because it's not a big audience. They're going to be able to ask them anything that they want to ask. And they are the voices that go out and are, interacting and leading various parts of that other body. So that's just one of many ways that you can imagine doing this. And we have a lot to learn. Though I will, credit to Jim, because when this was all happening and it was like, I was like, well, we just, we're going to have to pick up the phone. We're not going anywhere for a while. And he said, isn't that how we used to do it? So it's a good reminder, right? That we didn't always have these really big, frontline fundraising teams that travel.
Right.
We spent a lot of time on the phone. And we made, we did good work on the phone before we had the resources to always be able to go see people.
I love it. Well said. Well, you mentioned Jim a couple of times. I'm curious, one of the recurring themes on this show for sure is just the importance of mentorship. And I know you've cited Jim as a mentor. Just tell me a little bit about mentorship that you've benefited from, who some of your key mentors are, and then also, how you think about maybe serving as a mentor now in a leadership role.
Yeah, mentorship is, it's so important. And it's I think it's one of the critical necessities for doing really good inclusion and justice work, right? Because everything that I learned and I know about advancement, I got from observing others passively or from them actively saying, no, do it this way. Jim is a great mentor, and he was someone I wanted to work with and learn from. And it was part of the reason I made the decision to come to Boston College. But Mark Llewellyn at UVA was a phenomenal mentor. And in a lot of ways, we had a lot of natural synergies, but the ways in which we disagreed and the ways that we managed and worked through those disagreements when I was working for Mark, were some of the most, some of the kind of most insightful moments of my career. And then sometimes you just have to say, okay, we disagree, but you're the boss. And learning and knowing and being able to articulate why you have a different viewpoint on it, or why you see the data in a different way, that only comes from having somebody who's willing to kind of engage with you in a very direct way. Likewise, Mark and I both worked for Dave Lieb at Penn State, and I have continued to rely on Dave heavily as I have made decisions or, run into a conundrum. I didn't work as directly with Rod Kirsch, but he was a great leader at Penn State. And of course, I worked with Scott Rabenald, who was at Tennessee for many years and is now at Texas, and still sometimes text him or pick up the phone and need to rely on that. And we need to make sure that when we're mentoring others, that we're not just gravitating again to kind of the lunch table, this is somebody I have a natural synergy with, right? We need to extend our mentorship out and we need to be aware of it, right? As we look across our organization, who is kind of being left out of the equation because they might not fit in as naturally with a particular kind of experience that kind of connects some people. Maybe they didn't play sports with these groups who are all former athletes and things. And we need to make sure that we're coaching our teams in deliberate ways to invite their colleagues that they wouldn't normally to lunch or to a cup of coffee or to connect with. And then we as leaders need to make sure that we are reaching deep into the organization and saying, who are the people that I can learn from because they're not like me, right? Because as I said earlier, I will learn from everybody that I work with, regardless of their position and level of experience or how they came into our organization. And that perspective is going to be what helps us catch the things that might seem tone deaf when we're communicating to broad audiences, because we've got somebody there that is looking at it from a different life experience than we have. And those are the people who are going to be able to help us have some of the more difficult conversations. And so we have a lot to learn from people who don't come from the same kinds of institutions and didn't have the exact same career trajectory or even college experience that we had.
Yeah, I think one of the things that many people miss from the office experience, especially maybe people that are earlier career, et cetera, is the social aspect. It is the water cooler or the lunch table talk. But and so we've been thinking about, even at Evertree, like, how do we kind of replicate some of that, but also maybe do so in a more intentional way so that it is creating new connections and relationships that maybe don't organically form in the in-office environment. So we've just started using a tool. It's a Slack tool that's become pretty popular called Donut. And basically, if you opt into it, every 2 weeks, you're automatically paired with a random colleague for lunch. It kind of automatically creates the calendar invitation. My meeting right after our podcast concludes is actually a donut meeting with one of my new colleagues who recently joined. And so that's, I think, another example of something that hopefully can create some of the same benefits and connectivity of the water cooler or the lunch table, but maybe with a more inclusive and kind of well orchestrated matching system, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've had any experiences like that trying to keep your team connected.
Yeah, we have, manufactured some things. We did trivia for a while. We're really mindful right now of
I mean, let's be honest, trivia's had a great year. Trivia was big in 2020. Trivia saved the early part of the, go home and stay home part of the pandemic for sure. We've thought about the ways too in which we do meetings and kind of pulling different speakers in and making sure we're highlighting all parts of the organization that might not normally be, visible, or that might be, easy to lose sight of in an environment like this, right? We want to make sure we're so heavily dependent on the great work that our operations and research team do. And we've been able to continue to have a successful fundraising year, last year and this year so far. And we couldn't have done that without a great support team. And some of those people never went home, right? And so we're also in different places. But I love the tip on donut. I'm going to try it. I'm a big fan of donuts in general. So great name, because I would definitely accept an invitation to go have a donut with someone. It's well done for sure. I do want to ask, you've talked about the idea of impact fundraising or impact driven fundraising as being something, you believe in and a trend you're excited about. You also referenced kind of the importance of social media as a fundraising tool. And certainly we've seen the growth of social media, the role it's played in things like giving days and so forth. But we've also, and ever true, we've been champions for the potential for social media to really drive major gift fundraising as well. You did cite this recent Barstool Fund campaign, and I'm really glad you brought it up. I've been following it. I can't stop just sort of being so fascinated with the work that they've done. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Dave Portnoy runs Barstool Sports. It's definitely a controversial platform in some regards, but they have gone above and beyond recently to really raise money that they're then directly distributing to small businesses that are being affected by the pandemic. And I actually texted a couple of my marketing colleagues about 2 weeks ago, Amy, and I was like, we should be doing this. I was like, first of all, Evertrue should be doing this, and we should be identifying students who are struggling, and we should be raising money, and we should be FaceTiming them, and we should be awarding the grants. And I look at what Barstool has done, and it's the Student Emergency Fund for small businesses, restaurants, etc. Every college we work with has launched some kind of student emergency fund. Nobody has elevated the student voices and brought the authenticity that Barstool has. And I just got to ask you, I mean, you followed it, you referenced it. Why aren't we FaceTiming students, recording it? Granted, there's, privacy, and we'd need to make sure they were okay with it. But like, the emotion that he is evoking from these small business owners is the same emotion we could be evoking, which then creates the social media flywheel, which makes more donors want to get excited. And I just feel like there's something we can learn from. It's one thing to raise money for small businesses. It's another thing to do it and then market it in such an authentic way.
Yeah. And and that's really the trick for us too, because we got so good at getting super polished, right? And
so polished,
higher education,
so polished. Yeah.
And I think healthcare fundraising suffers from this a little bit too, right? And we've lost kind of our authenticity in that, and some of the passion. And there is a great tool out there. ThankView is, will never forget, like opening an email from the University of Tennessee, and there was like a student looking right at me, and she said my name, and it was recorded, right? And but the thing is like, some of the smaller nonprofits and the really savvy social media driven businesses, they've already kind of a leap ahead of that, right? With these kind of live FaceTime calls. And I think that that's another way that we will have to be deliberate in how we stretch. And then we also have to acknowledge the cultures of our institutions, right? Because, different institutions will have different levels of comfort with that. And very much to your point, it could never be done in a way where the student felt exploited, or that somebody would be concerned that, that we weren't careful about that. And so I think there's a lot to work out on that, but I absolutely convinced, I can't stop watching those videos because it's just unfolding live, and this is a lifeline. It's somebody threw me the lifesaver and I didn't even know it was coming. And, and we've got to demonstrate impact.
Yeah.
We're kind of getting our tails kicked by some really, like, some smaller nonprofits that are really nimble and able to be super transparent and clear and say, when you give me X, when you give us X, this happens, and you can see it happen.
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum as well, which is today, let's say that we default to really polished, very much driven by the cultures of the organization. On the other end of the spectrum is Dave Portnoy FaceTiming somebody totally ad hoc and then putting it on the internet for millions of people to see. And I feel like even in between, though, what about a more private version of that you could then show as a video in a donor conversation? Hey, these are some of the students that have really been recipients of your scholarship, right? Like, it's so much different than the scholarship luncheon where we all get together and have the chicken, or the letter that somebody gets that's a form letter saying thank you so much for your scholarship. So it's like maybe we don't pivot all the way to Barstool Fund, but how do we kind of push the envelope a little bit more to make it fun, to make it authentic? And oh, by the way, a lot of our donors are watching Barstool too. He's on CNBC every other week. He's on different media platforms all the time. So it's not like they don't know and consume that themselves. And that when they look at, institutional content, it needs to be this buttoned up and polished, right?
And the other piece of this too is, those impact stories, we need to do a better job of that at the really large scale philanthropy as well. And so you kind of alluded to, custom experiences for our donors. And I think there is a real opportunity. We used to maybe put a book of pictures together and send that. There's a way to really, now use the technology at hand to send a video. Yes. Montage of ways that gifts have changed our campuses or our students' experiences.
I love it. Really well said. Well, Amy, I do have to get to this donut meeting here, so we're going to need to wrap. But if people, one, are you hiring? And two, if people want to stay in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, we're hiring. We were able to move forward with a handful of positions. So please, come to bc.edu and follow the advancement links and look at those positions. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn, amy.yancey@bc.edu. Email me, and certainly you can find me on Instagram and Facebook too.
Love it. Amy, it's really been a privilege. I wish you the best as we all continue to navigate the challenges of 2020, 2021 here. But I think your enthusiasm and positivity around the continued importance of access to education is more on display in almost any arena that you might look at this point. And we share your passion and commitment to the sector, and really just want to thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Brent. I'm really glad that you as a partner, EverTrue, is so focused on this topic. It's important. It's going to take all of us to make appreciable change. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Best wishes.